Hello everyone. Okay, let's discuss the expectations of SBL, especially when some of you are planning to resit your paper in September. So at least you will roughly know what is expected of you in the Strategic Business Leader paper. Now, this is the overview of SBL syllabus. That means this is a snapshot of what are the topics that will be covered in SBL. You will study the topic of leadership, governance, strategy, risks, controls, financial planning, innovation, performance excellence, and change management. And the last one is on technology and data analytics. So remember, in your SBL syllabus, you still need to acquire your technical knowledge because there will still be 80% on your technical content. So some of the topics that you see here could be very similar to some of the knowledge that you have acquired in P1 and P3 previously. However, even though the topics are the same, but the context of SBL is a little bit different. That's because if you just show your technical knowledge without doing your professional skills, which is 20%, there is no way that you can pass this paper. And that is why in your SBL, you're expected to deliver the professional skills of communication, commercial acumen, analysis, skepticism, and evaluation. So in other words, you need to acquire technical knowledge and then you need to apply your knowledge using and to also demonstrate the professional skills that you are required to do. And these professional skills will take up 20 marks of your exams. Okay, so what is the aim of this paper? Remember, the main objective of this paper is to demonstrate what we call organizational leadership, as well as senior consultancy or advisory capabilities. Okay, and usually all these skills will be put through the context of an integrated case study. In other words, as a student, they want you to develop some leadership skills, some advisory skills, some consultancy skills. So most of the time as a student, you'll be put in the role of a consultant or an advisor to senior management, or perhaps you can even be a leader in a particular organization. So let's say, for example, you could be the finance director of an organization and you have been asked to provide certain advice. And that's why your communication skills is communication. Your professional skills is communication, commercial acumen, analysis, evaluation, and skepticism. So as a leader and a professional accountant, what ACCA wants to develop for you is that you should have a range of professional skills so that you can analyze problems. So you just can imagine what the integrated case study will look like. Maybe there will be some problems faced by the business and you may need to analyze the problems, why it happened, how it happened, and perhaps you may be asked to advise or even consult sustainable strategic choices to address the business and its stakeholders. And again, we're going to revise a little bit on the word sustainability because again, a lot of times people do not understand the meaning of the word sustainable strategic choices. And at the end of the day, when you do your SBL, you should have qualitative as well as quantitative skills. That is why there is a chapter on financial planning, where you may need to apply your quantitative skill so that you can provide sound judgment from a commercial point of view. Is it going to be viable for that company? Is it going to be feasible for that company? Is it going to be acceptable for that company to do certain things. And then you may need to communicate to senior management, like the board. That is why qualitative knowledge is still your technical knowledge. So you must still acquire the syllabus technical knowledge about leadership, about governance, about risk management, about controls, about technology and data analytics, and therefore, plus you may have to use your quantitative skills to calculate or maybe to analyze certain things so that you can communicate to senior management whether something is viable, feasible, or even acceptable. And hopefully at the end of the day, as a leader and a professional accountant, you will also understand the importance of ethics. Because if you want to be a successful business leader, ethical principles will still need to be upheld. Okay, and again, they require you to be able to draw out such issues when necessary as well. Okay, so how to pass SBL, especially those of you who are resitting this paper and you're trying SBL for the first time in September 2018. So remember, you need your technical knowledge because some of this knowledge have been acquired from your previous papers in your skills level, like your F9, F1, okay, but most of it comes from your P1 and your P3, which makes up like 70 to 80%. But remember, there are also new areas. That's why you need to listen to some of the videos, especially done by Mr. Lawrence, because there will be new areas such as data analytics, cloud computing, because there will be a whole chapter about talking about the need for technology in a business, because a lot of businesses depend on technology to be successful today. And most importantly, you must do questions. Yeah, that's why use your revision kit if you have one. If you don't have one, you should get one so that you can apply whatever knowledge that you have acquired with your professional skills. Remember, your professional skills is still 20 marks. So then you will see us for revision. And finally, you have to do your final preparation before exams. That's why do your mock exams and please get feedback from your lecturers and improve yourself. Okay, so how much of P1 technical knowledge is transferred to SBL? Now remember, this video is prepared by Miss Magdalene here. So I'm only going to talk about P1 technical knowledge because Mr. Lawrence will deal with the P3 technical knowledge in another video. Now remember, in P1 we studied about professional values, ethics, CSR. So, and we studied things like ethical theories like Colesberg absolutism versus relativism, the ontological Tucker's model, AA model. And we also talk about CSR from GOA 7 different point of view. We also talk about corporate citizenship. We also talk about things like ethics from a professional perspective. Now, CSR will still be retained in SBL, but in another part of the chapter. Ethics will still be there, and ethics will be covered under Section A, because Section A talks about qualities of leadership, as well as the importance of what we call ethical leadership. So you will still see things like the Professional Code of Ethics, Tucker's model, but things like Colesberg, absolutism, deontological, AA model will no longer be tested in SBL paper. So also in SBL, there will be a section B on governance. So everything that you have learned under governance in P1 will still be retained in SBL, because every time you talk about governance, you have to understand the idea of agency, how agency problems arise because of separation of ownership and management, and also to talk about why is there a need for companies to think about stakeholders as well, because stakeholders today may make certain claims, and because they make certain claims, perhaps companies also have to think about things like CSR. So a lot of these things will be maintained in SBL, and then you have to study everything about corporate governance one more time. You have to talk about how the board of directors should be carrying out their duties, what is their composition supposed to be like, how board should always have board committees, how directors should be paid. So like what exactly that you have learned in P1. But at the same time, even though most of the time your integrated case study will be on profit-making companies, my students in SBL still needs to know about public sector governance, because there is a possibility that your integrated case study could be a public sector organization. Okay, and in P1, if you can recall, you study the topics on risk management. Okay, in section C and D, you talk about risk management. Again, in SBL, this information will be transferred to SBL. So in SBL, you also have to study about the need for companies to do risk management and how they should manage their risks, except that when you are trying to analyze your risks faced by a company, in SBL paper, we may talk about the use of heat maps. Now, heat maps was actually covered in P3. So again, there's nothing new in your SBL paper. And finally, we will talk about controls, because again, companies need good management and internal control systems, or sound management and internal control systems, as part of risk management, as well as to ensure that companies are able to get adequate flows of information to management. So again, this is all covered in section B of your P1 paper in the previous syllabus. Now, when you talk about internal controls, when you talk about the topic of controls, definitely you have to talk about the idea of auditing, because controls needs to be monitored, controls needs to be audited, and usually in the case of internal controls of a company, organization may need to think whether they may need to establish what we call an internal audit function, because internal auditors are usually very useful as a monitoring mechanism to review the effectiveness of the internal controls, as well as to report to the board of directors. So again, all the things that you have studied in P1 on internal audit will be transferred to SBL as well. And at the same time, we also have to study about the importance of management reporting about the state of internal controls to the shareholders. Again, these are all the topics that we have already covered in the P1 syllabus. Okay, so therefore, when you are doing an integrated case study on SBL, I want you to remember two things. I want you to be able to look at the organization's internal environment, as well as to look at the organization's external change drivers and how it impacts strategic decision making. So Miss Mac's part, I will be tackling this part. Okay, because I will talk about the internal environment aspects like leadership, culture, governance. And every time when you talk about governance, you definitely have to talk about risk management and controls, and the need to apply ethics. Okay? Because a lot of business leaders out there has what we call ethical leadership. And Mr. Lawrence will be looking at all the external environment part and linking it to the strategic decision making of the company. So I hope this video has made you understand the expectations of SBL. And in the following video, you will see Ms. Mac talking about why leadership and culture is an essential thing to ensure that businesses are successful And therefore, in your integrated case study, you may need to analyze the leadership of a company, the culture of a company, and find out what are the problems and how to resolve problems in that particular company. So this is one of those questions that you will get. And later on, I'm also going to show you there are also questions where you may need to analyze the governance of the company. Like, for example, you may need to look at the composition of the board, whether the company has board committees, because maybe there is something, the company is facing some issues as well, and therefore, again, you may need to analyze why. You may need to recommend things for the company, and there might even be a question on risk management. Perhaps the company is not managing their risks as well as expected, so they may ask you as a consultant to advise them what to do. Or the question can even talk about asking you to assess or evaluate the effectiveness of the internal controls of the company and find out what's the problem. Or they could even talk about unethical issues or unethical leadership happening in the organization and why this is not acceptable and why it might bring problems to the company. And again, they may ask you for consultancy or advice, what the company should be doing to address the business and its stakeholders. Okay, so this is Ms. Mac's part. I will talk about the internal environment part. And then Mr. Lawrence will talk about the external drivers that may impact strategic decision of making of a company. So I hope you understand the the expectation of SBL, so that when you open an SBL paper later on, when we integrate the whole case study for you, you will see these are the topics that you are expected to answer. Okay, thank you very much. So please listen to the next video, because the next video we will talk about the aspects of leadership, strategy, and culture. Thank you.